Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Tigray, and today I would like to comment briefly on a tweet sent out by UN Ethiopia today. It's a tweet that you see on the screen, and I believe it's a very misleading tweet. It's malicious. The intent is to disinform and misinform, and not to update in good faith. But before I come back to dissect it, because I think it's very important that we do that. Although I don't think there's anybody in the UN who would like to listen to us, to our grievances and objections and make corrections. But I think for the sake of off record, really, it's important that we will register our misgivings when it comes to the UN. But I think there's just bear with me. I will come back to the tweet, but I think there's a bigger point to be made when it comes to humanitarian organizations, especially those based in Ethiopia. I think they have taught us very, very important lessons for the past 2 years, which is that they are more than happy to be used as weapons by dictators like Abiy, and that's exactly what has happened for the past 2 years. The UN, you could mention the UN, and you could mention the other organizations like Red Cross, and how they have been co-opted by Abiy as weapons against Tigray. Most of you will remember how Abiy evicted about, I think, 12 UN staffers, not because they said anything negative about Ethiopia, not because they violated anything, but because they simply quietly refused to parrot any of the lines of Abiy. So it was a muted objection to Abiy, but that didn't save them from being evicted. And when they were evicted, the UN couldn't come to their rescue because it didn't have any mechanism for doing that. There's a fundamental design flaw in the way that these bodies work. They are supposed to work with the consent of the country, of the regime within which they are supposed to operate. And if that consent is withdrawn, there isn't much that they could do. But I think that's a more fundamental problem, and we should come back to that. I think people should write about that, about how anything and everything, including the very entities that are supposed to be humanitarians, could actually be used for the exact opposite purpose, for attacking humanity. But that's a wider point, and that's a point that requires a bit of wider context and more discussion, and that's not my objective for today. For today, I just want to focus on this particular tweet. So the tweet, maybe I should read out the tweet for you, just in case you're listening to me with YouTube in the background. So more than 17,000 metric ton of relief food delivered to Tigray by the government of Ethiopia and humanitarian partners since mid-November. Efforts are ongoing to reach more conflict-affected people across northern Ethiopia. So, a couple of points. I think that the first point to notice is that they 17,000 metric ton of aid. Now, is it realistic that amount of aid has been delivered to Tigray? And By Tigray, presumably they mean the entirety of Tigray, so southern Tigray, and we know that parts of southern Tigray are under the control of Fano, and western Tigray, the vast majority of which is under the control of Fano and the Eritreans, and eastern Tigray, including Europe, again, huge parts of Europe and some parts of eastern Tigray are under the occupation of Eritrea. But when the UN says Tigray here, they mean the entirety of Tigray. So it includes aid that has been delivered to areas under the control of Eritrea and Amhara. So technically, aid that has been delivered to Eritreans and Amharas and not to Tigray. But I will come back to that later because that's a very important point. But for now, let's just let's wonder if or whether 17,000 metric ton of aid is a realistic number. Now, we know what has been happening. So they're telling us that the aid, this is a figure for aid that has been supposedly delivered to Tigray from mid-November. So that is from around 15th of November. And today is 25th. So it's the last 10 days that they are talking about. Now, we have been following the news, and there was a couple of trucks that made it to Mekelle. There was a couple of flights, mainly medicine, that made it to Mekelle and to Shire. And there was some convoys, well, at least according to them, although we know that they take their data from the Ethiopian regime, and the Ethiopian regime's field of expertise, as we know, is lying, shameless lying. But anyway, they told that there were a couple of trucks to Shire and to Humera, for instance, and both Shire and Humera, as we know, are under the occupation of Eritrean and Amhara forces. And any sensible person who has even a modicum of an ability to discern wouldn't believe that 17,000 metric ton of anything has made it to Tigray. So that's simply a lie. That's a number that they plucked out of thin air. 17,000 is it's not a lot in the face of the huge demand in Tigray. I'm not saying this is a lot, but it's not nothing either. And there is no way that 17,000 metric ton of anything has got into Tigray. So that's a lie. I think we could take it for granted that they have exaggerated, which again, it wouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. But I think if the second one that really got my attention, which is that these according to them, this aid is provided for by the government of Ethiopia and humanitarian partners. Of course, they don't tell us what portion of it is provided for by Ethiopia, by the government of Ethiopia, according to them, by the regime, and what portion of it is provided by humanitarian partners. But if there anyone among you who believes that the Ethiopian government would be generous enough to give anything to Tigrayans, if there anybody who believes that this could actually happen, there simply is no way that the Ethiopian regime would, out of its own coffers, provide aid for Tigray. That simply is not happening. That's a blatant lie. But I mean, some of you would ask me, how do you know? You don't have any evidence. But again, that makes my point. If the Ethiopian regime had been providing anything to Tigray, it would have flooded social media and TV and radio with news and celebrations of its trucks flowing to Tigray and people receiving aid and all that. That would have been the single most important talking point for them for the past 10 days. If indeed the Ethiopian regime had provided anything to Tigray. But I'm all of us know that nothing of that sort has happened. And the reason that hasn't happened is because nothing has been provided for by the Ethiopian regime. So for the UN Ethiopia, I understand why they would say that. They are trying to appease the Ethiopian regime. They are trying to pander to the Ethiopian regime. And partly, other reason is UN Ethiopia is staffed by people who are, on the whole, supporters of Abiy, who are, on the whole, enemies of the people of Tigray. So they would do and say anything that would help Abiy and that would hurt Tigrayans. So, of course, it's not difficult to explain why they would do that. But I think it's very important that we categorically reject or repudiate, rather, the idea that the Ethiopian government has provided anything to Tigray. That simply hasn't happened. That's a lie. But we understand why they are saying that. And then the other interesting point here, and I briefly mentioned that, is that they are using the word Tigray here, which is interesting. I mean, in normal times, it wouldn't have been an issue, right? Whether aid was delivered to Western Tigray or to Southern Tigray or to Central Tigray. It would have been immaterial as long as aid was getting it. But in the current context, in the current circumstances, it matters whether aid was delivered to Western Tigray and Southern Tigray or to Central Tigray, because we know that if the aid is getting to Western Tigray, and we know the vast majority of the aid, insofar as there was aid delivered to Tigray, has been delivered to Western Tigray. And we know who is in Western Tigray, right? We know that Western Tigray now is occupied, is controlled by Amharas and Eritreans. And the Tigrayans who used to live in Western Tigray have either been evicted of their homes and sent to Central Tigray, or put in concentration camps, in prison, or even killed. I think one of the finally, when we when some light will be shed into Western Tigray, I dread to know what must have unfolded in Western Tigray. The mass graves and the atrocities and the cruelty unleashed in Western Tigray is beyond any description, and we know that because we have seen glimpses of some reporting. And when the full picture emerges, it would be one of the most, I'm not trying to shock anybody, but it would be one of the most shocking things to witness. But anyways, aid that has been delivered to Western Tigray would technically fall under Tigray, because for the UN, Western Tigray, at least in this context, is part of Tigray. So they would say that aid that has been delivered to Western Tigray is aid that has been delivered to Tigray, because for them it's important for the numbers. They would say that. But of course, you look closer and you understand that that is actually aid that is delivered to the very people who have killed, who have evicted, who have harassed, and who have destroyed, and who have ethnically cleansed Tigrayans. So this is some sort of double attack on Tigray, right? On the one hand, the aid in their name is being provided to their enemies. And number two, the Ethiopian government is going to get some sort of plaudits and some sort of credits for providing aid to Tigray, when in fact it wasn't actually given to Tigray, right? And the UN knows this very important detail. And if they had wanted to be careful, if they didn't want to be used for propaganda purposes, they could have made this very, very important distinction. They could have said, all right, this is how much aid we have delivered to Western Tigray, and this is how much aid we have delivered to Central Tigray, and this is how much aid we have delivered to Southern Tigray. They don't have to be political. They could simply state what part of Tigray they have provided aid, and then they leave the rest to the observer. And if they said, for instance, that 90% of the aid has been delivered to Tigray, everybody would know why, and everybody would know what's happening, and it would be difficult for the Ethiopian government to use that for propaganda purposes. But because now they are using this very ambiguous language, the Ethiopian regime is going to say, listen, we are providing aid to Tigray, when in fact it's providing aid to the very people that have been helping it destroy Tigray. So this is very, very, very wicked and very evil of the UN, and they know what they are doing. They know that reporting, couching the language in this way, is very, very dangerous to Tigray. Not just the exaggeration of the number, not just giving the Ethiopian regime credit where it doesn't deserve, but most importantly, saying that aid that they deliver to the enemies of Tigray has actually been delivered to Tigray. That's an insult. That's very very sick. That's very dangerous. And if the UN was led by sensible people who pretend to be what they say they are, humanitarian, they could have been more careful in the way that they tweet, in the way that they write, in the way that they report. They could have propaganda proofed their writing and their utterances and the way generally they report about Ethiopia. So I want to make this point, because I understand that no one in the UN is interested in listening to ground voices and be corrected and being more careful and all that. We understand that. We have been observing for the past 2 years in vain that they don't really care. But at the very least, it's important that they know we're not being taken for fools. We understand how they are willfully being weaponized by the Ethiopian government, and when when the time comes, the right time comes, they will live to regret it, because this is lamentable, regrettable thing to do for any humanitarian agency, to mislead and misinform and disinform and be a willful participant in genocide and in starving people. So that is the point that I wanted to make today. But like I said in the beginning, I think there's a wider point to make, a more fundamental point to make about how humanitarian agencies have been weaponized, and how there should be a change in the way that they function, in their structure, and in the way that they do report, in the way they interact with people at the receiving end of brutality. There's a lot of change that they should make, and maybe in due time I will write a short essay about that and come here to talk about that further. But for today, I just wanted for us to have a look into this tweet, and how for us to see how they are being used as weapons against Tigray. And thanks for the listen. And please, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. We're trying to do we're trying to bring on people with expertise and experience, and interview them to enlighten us and all that. And I think it's one way of doing them justice would be making sure that what they say reaches to as many people as possible. And that's why that I from time to time keep asking you to subscribe and to make the channel bigger than it is. And thank you so much for listening to me, and bye bye. Have a good time.